half of an analysis of Sylvia Plath's Shipping Pod. Just a quick look at how this works. Last time round, we were looking at the concept of how the first two stanzas worked with a few questions and a chance to look at the effects of the train's arrival and then departure. So, looking at the second half of the poem, from stanza 3 onwards, we've got whose dolorous bells, I think last time I said Dolores, whose dolorous bells all morning the morning has been blackening. We start with that first oral image, this notion of a sound image. Everything has pretty much been visual to this point. And we see this notion that this sound seems to cut through, a bit like the colour of the rust of the train in the previous stanza. And we've got this notion that the train and the horse is sort of pastoral image alongside an industrial image of the train is linked in. And normally we would associate the sound of a horse's hooves with a sense of speed and rhythm and action. Yet here, when we look at the word dolorous, we get this sense of something which is almost funereal, delineating sorrow or distress. And this indeed ends on that hyphen, which I know the writing's small, but pretty much acts as some kind of interruption. And we move into this more funereal sense along with these lines about mourning, which normally dissociate mourning as the start of a day, a time of renewal and rebirth, and yet we've got this sense that it's a different time here. All morning. Notice the word all. Again, we've got this sense of the specifics with the word the appearing earlier on with the hills, and now we're looking at the notion of the morning in its entirety. All morning, the morning, and we notice here that we've got this double repetition possibility. And I know the writing's very small down here, but we look at this idea of the homonym of morning, M-O-R, as in the day, and morning, M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G. All morning, the morning has been blackening. And how can a day when it's supposed to be getting brighter seem to be getting darker at the same time? It's an ironic sense of the whole piece. And yet we do have this funereal sense, as it says on the left-hand side down here. We've got this notion of the evidence, the bells, the dolorous bells, the blackening of the day, the connotations that this is not a particularly nice time. And the irony is it should be getting brighter, the sense of this oxymoron. How can something that seems to be getting brighter at the same time seem to be getting darker? And then we're moving on to the break in between the two lines. The word enjambment or enjambment basically looks at this idea of a gap. We've got one here, all morning and even though we can see what's going to hum, this notion of the line hanging here, all morning the morning has been blackening. And indeed, this is the longest line in the entire poem that keeps going over 7 lines in its entirety. So what's the effect of this has been blackening, leaving us with this concept of this word hanging here, and yet we come down to the flower being left out. And we've got this sense of the most perhaps startlingly beautiful image in the piece, yet this sense of something so exposed in something above, which represents darkness and a sort of funereal feel. Now we have this sense of an isolated piece. And we've got this, what's the effect of this? What does it do? And you notice one of the few times we actually have the notion of the word or the letter A there happening. The beauty is exposed. Is it like the speaker itself? We have the few times of the indefinite article rather than the definite article. Are we seeing the speaker or narrator of the poem feeling this sense of isolation and trying to find identity in the piece overall? This, as I said, is the longest line. It's 7 lines in a poem. We frequently have 1 line or 2 lines. What's the effect of that? What do we notice when we have this sense of the playing through of this image in the center of the poem? Something to think about when you're unpacking it yourself. Moving down the second part, we can see that the speaker becomes the focus rather than all these things around the voice. We've got this notion of my bones hold a stillness. The far fields melt my heart. And we notice this notion of some of the onomatopoeic sounds, the sort of the O, the groaning sounds, and also obviously assonance with the O sounds. Heavy burden, the weight being coming on here. And it seems almost a sense of this groaning, this sense of tiredness, of fatigue in the piece. look back to earlier, we'll notice the slow horse that's referred to. Notice, oh, slow horse, my bones, the flower left out. And here we've also got this notion of a stillness, this moment again, almost like a pastoral snapshot, a moment of reflection occurring in this peaceful sense. We then move on to another use of the definite article, the far fields. Again, we've got a little bit of alliteration there with the F sounds occurring, and the sense of the distance. Um, they're there, yet the speaker is here. And indeed, we move on with this notion that these fields melt the heart. Now, normally we might associate with, my heart melts as being something that's linked to almost a romantic sense, something feeling an attractive softness and vulnerability. But yet here, is it a positive? Is it a negative? Are they doing something which benefits? Are they calling to the speaker? There's lots of possibilities to how you might want to interpret that along in this particular instance. So is it the sense of longing, this thing that's not attainable, being left in this fog in this sense, and yet the fields that are a way off have some kind of effect on the speaker? Coming on towards the last stanza itself, we have the they coming over from the previous bit of the fields. Almost there seem to be the sense that they're judging. They, and we noticed this before, that we looked at the people and stars in the first part of the poem. And that word threaten, is it a sense of that it's almost an active verb, a harm that's being caused? They're going to do something to the speaker, or is it more a sense of the weakness that comes through to let me through, as if it's almost like being done by accident or as a consequence? Like as I said here, giving way, because we end up at a place, and we can see perhaps the sense of enchantment again, going through to heaven. And notice that notion right on the edge, this to a heaven, and we think, oh, this is the sense of nirvana, the sense of possibility. We're on the edge of a precipice, the transition towards, and yet we seem to have the final line, something which perhaps is disturbing and unsatisfying. This notion of the starless and fatherless, a dark water. And obviously, we've got those quite stark AR sounds and A sounds occurring here in this sense of assonance, perhaps with a bit of alliteration put in as well. And then we've got this notion of the S sounds coming through, the starless, the fatherless, and this sense of it's not a encouraging and reassuring image that we have here to end the poem. And we end with this last line, part a dark water, when we look at all the fog and all of the whiteness and the various shades of lightness we've had in the first part, and yet we have this summation of the whole piece now being a dark water. The last line itself going back, starless and fatherless, a dark water. And we looked up here, as I said before, about the people and stars, yet here we have no stars. We have no paternal figures, perhaps of guidance and reassuring security going on. So it's bleak, it's quite dark in the real sense. There's no higher order and there's no family support. The voice, the speaker, is very much ending the poem, I think, in a sense of questioning and isolation. The dark water, the depth seems to be untested. Again, possibly a bleak image. There's no sense of definition here. It's the unknown. We have obviously tones of light and dark throughout the poem itself. We have a very limited colour palette if you take away the whites. We only have really the possibility of the suggestion of the flower, and then obviously the rust-coloured train that departs and the sense of being abandoned. And the verbs often use present tense. What's the effect of this? There's little positive or presenting hope in the piece, in one which ultimately the poem is probably questioning people or a person's place in the world, finding one's identity, questioning identity in amongst an environment which is challenging, looking for meaning which isn't necessarily always possible to find. Anyway, I hope you found this second part of the poem's initial analysis useful, and please let me know if you have any questions in due course. I look forward to trying to do some more of these in the near future. Thank you.